Hello, and welcome to Sonata She Wrote. Today we'll be discussing the seventh song in Schubert's Die Winterreise, Auf dem Flusse, or On the River. This seemingly simplistic poem has been one of the main weapons used when accusing Wilhelm Müller of the most unforgivable crime, mediocrity. But there's more beneath the surface than many critics seem to understand, and luckily, Schubert was able to match Wilhelm's freak, as they say. The song depicts our wanderer approaching a frozen river.
Der du so lustig rauschtest, du heller wilder Fluss, wie still bist du geworden, gibst keinen Scheidegruß. Mit harter, starrer Rinde hast du dich überdeckt, liegst kalt und unbeweglich im Sande ausgestreckt.
Before the text even begins, it should be apparent that the pianist, Tom Beghin, is using a pedal to change the tone of his instrument here. If you watched the short video where he describes this instrument, you know it actually has 5 pedals. Although there is a moderator pedal, which covers the strings in felt, dampening the sound and clarity, my hunch is he's actually using the una corda pedal, the pedal that simply moves the mechanism slightly so only one string is struck by the hammer, rather than the typical 2 or 3, and this pedal is still on modern instruments. There's still a good bit of clarity in the tone here, and the felt specifically removes that clarity. Later in the song, when he releases the pedal for a forte, I think it's more obvious that there's no felt involved. The wanderer approaches the river and recalls it rushing forth, but when he returns to reality and the hard crust of ice over the entire surface, the music shifts uncomfortably down a half step to D sharp minor. In addition to this being a bizarre key change for the time, the repeated tonic 6/4 chord, which only at the last moment resolves to the dominant, makes it even more unsettling. Schubert uses these two tonalities throughout the song as distorted reflections of each other, or maybe you could say, as the same image viewed through a sheet of ice. The same occurs in verse 2, and you can also see that D sharp minor, not E minor, is given pride of place for cadences in both verses. There is plenty of dominant to tonic motion in E minor, but it typically takes the form of an imperfect cadence, whereas D sharp minor's cadences are all PACs.
In deine Decke grab ich mit einem spitzen Stein den Namen meiner Liebsten und Stund und Tag hinein. Dem Tag des ersten Grußes, dem Tag, an dem ich ging, uns allen windet sich ein zerbrochener Ring.
In these verses, Schubert turns to E major. If you're setting up a drinking game for this cycle, definitely one of them should be the wanderer mentions his beloved, in which case you would drink now. Conjuring up the imagery of a gravestone, the wanderer writes her name and the dates of their first meeting and his departure, the life and death of his love. Perhaps most meaningfully, Schubert enhances the Müller's broken ring by ending this section with not a tonic cadence, but a half cadence, which then transitions us back into E minor. In verse 5, Schubert plays with the texture slightly. The pianist is now more prominent, and the vocal line has an almost recitative quality.
Mein Herz in diesem Bache erkennst du nun dein Bild, ob's unter seiner Rinde wohl auch so reißend schwingt, ob's wohl
In the final verse, the only one which is given any repetition, Schubert follows the same pattern as verse 1 and 2. When discussing what appears beneath the ice, the memory is distorted along with the image of his beloved. The music in D-sharp minor is also much more active, reflecting the rushing river trapped beneath the ice. In Retracing a Winter's Journey, Youens writes, "No longer is the radical shift of tonality stated within small, tight boundaries. Now it is expressed in a way that finally makes overt the innate violence of the gesture and asserts heated, rushing motion and overflowing boundaries as truer to the heart's inmost self than frozen passivity."
Mein Herz in diesem Bache erkennst du nun dein Bild, ob's unter seiner Rinne wohl auch so reißend schwillt, ob's voll Haar so reißend schwillt, ob's voll Haar so reißend schwillt.
Something all of the cadences in E minor have in common in this work is that they share the same weakness. Each one is missing inner voices, in most cases caused by an eighth rest gap in the treble voice of the piano. To my ear, none sounds weaker than the final cadence, which occurs almost too soon, and emphasizing this weakness is the fact that there is no dominant tonic repetition in the piano outro. I hope you enjoyed this analysis of Auf dem Flusse. The next song, number 8, is Rückblick, or Backward Glance. As always, thank you to my patrons who you can see on the screen now. If you'd like to join my Patreon for any amount, you'll have access to about an hour and 45-minute analysis of Mahler's First Symphony that's exclusive to Patreon. You can do so at patreon.com/sonata she wrote. As always, thank you for joining me.